I've been listening a bunch recently to Heidi Priebe. She's got a fabulous YouTube channel where she talks about the relationship dynamics and strategies around people in the context of attachment theory and what what the circumstances of having insecure attachment look like and what the tools and strategies for mitigating that in secure relationships look like. It's really interesting stuff. And one of the videos that we have consumed recently, because my wife and I are paying attention to it together, is one that discusses the processes associated with setting healthful boundaries as they relate to your own needs within a relationship that is either secure or insecure, and what those boundaries ought to be and what the outcomes of setting boundaries in that way might be. And it is certainly a fascinating topic in its own right. But there's one that from this morning's discussion really is bouncing around in my head. And it's this idea of setting a boundary as it relates to being authentic in your expectations of how you might ask for another person's assistance, emotional care. They use the term regulation a lot. Attachment theory wrestles with the idea that everybody needs emotional care. Everybody requires regulation in some way or another. It's a very human need, but due to childhood circumstances, not everyone has a model of how to negotiate and request that assistance that is healthful. And one of the boundaries that she was talking about was this idea of doing so authentically, like telling yourself, I will not engage in a relationship with a person wherein my requests for regulation, my requests for emotional solace, my requests for support are underhanded or devious or manipulative. And that's a concept that, when described on its own with that language, it's pretty easy to be like, heck yeah, that is something that I support. But it gets complicated when we realize that there are a bunch of ways that humans who are healthy or who are trying to be healthy could be subconsciously deploying those strategies. Like, I might not be thinking to myself, ha ha ha, I'm going to manipulate someone, but I could, on reflection, realize that a bit of communication that I had thought was innocuous, in fact, has this request sort of, laced in it. And that's tricky. So even in that circumstance, like, it still feels noble. It still feels beautiful to strive to have this boundary where you hold yourself responsible for being sufficiently honest with oneself and sufficiently honest with your relationship partners, romantic or otherwise, that the nourishment that you and the other person are seeking to receive through the manifestation of the relationship itself is intentional and forthright. But it also becomes clear that that's, one of those easier said than done type things. This comes up for me at an interesting time. I'm always thinking about how I can better understand my own emotional landscape. But this past weekend was, for a bunch of reasons, the World Series of Matthew navigating his own emotional landscape. My daughter got married, which is just a really beautiful thing. Just like super duper beautiful. The circumstances of the marriage are ones that are unambiguously positive in my mind. Her partner is a phenomenal woman. They've been together for a very long time, and as a result know each other really well. I had the privilege of hearing their friends and confidants toast them, and the language that was used in those toasts was beautiful and reassuring and mature and suggestive of a very healthy relationship. So the fact of the marriage is not itself fraught outside of the typical ways in which just the, as a parent whose child is getting married, it's like, holy crap, the stuff that we think about in the context of time and aging and identity and yada, yada, yada. However, there were a bunch of other ways that it was fraught. I have the experience, which I think is a fairly common experience, albeit not perhaps universal, that just any interaction with large groups of family can be a lot. Certainly it's pretty common for people to talk about how the holidays are unusually draining. So yeah, like even in the relationships that I would consider fairly adapted, fairly secure, spending a lot of time, a good chunk of time in the context of people who you love, who have needs, who you have history with, it's just a higher energy expense. But there's also a probability, and this was certainly the case for me, that some of the family that you're around is people that you're not secure with, people that you're not well adapted to. In my case, there is both some of that within my own extended family, and my daughter's mother is my ex-wife, and we've been divorced for, 20 years? Probably more like 22, 23 years. And in that time, we've exclusively communicated about Hannah, my daughter, and infrequently. This is partly because my own emotional journey was a very challenging one during my early and middle life. And one of the outcomes of that, some of the debris of that, is that there was quite a long time where I didn't have communication with my daughter. Now I've been communicating with her at varying degrees for a decade now, but there was both the context in this wedding of me being in the same room as a bunch of people who I used to know and love and who I haven't had any communication with, my ex-wife, her sibling, her parents, cousins, etc. And my deep and abiding desire just as a parent to be present and to show up for my daughter in all of the literal and figurative ways, but also to not permit these challenging and largely unrepaired relationships to create a set of circumstances that were hard for her. Like, worst case scenario, which is something that I somewhat struggle to not think about, but like worst case scenario would be, having some sort of dust up with somebody that I haven't seen in a really long time. It was easy in my head to say this is unlikely, but it was also difficult in my heart to say it was impossible. So there was, anxiety around that. And I don't want to experience the emotional upheaval of that sort of interaction in general. And I particularly don't want to experience it in the circumstance where, my daughter is looking to be able to focus on her own joy, and I'm looking to celebrate her joy, and I don't want to be problematic. Now, leading up to the event, in discussion with Hannah, my daughter, I was given feedback that I was not the only one that felt this way. Which I'm not going to lie, that was a little reassuring to hear that both sides of the family were like, how can we make sure this goes off correctly? And I'm happy to say that in nearly every case, it did go well. It seems to have not been problematic. To the best of anybody's ability to measure such things, but that is my impression. This is a pencil. But there was one thing that happened that sort of grabbed my attention in the context of the Heidi Priebe commentary around boundaries. Like, I knew in the moment that it occurred that there was, some suboptimal stuff going on. But I didn't have the language that I'm going to use now to describe it until I was debating and going back over it in the context of the boundary setting, the desire to hold oneself accountable to engaging in relationships where requests for emotional support are authentic and intentional and not manipulative. And that specifically was that I had an exchange with her grandmother, my ex-wife's mother, that in the moment I interpreted as spicy. Yeah. The super short version is that my immediate extended family was walking past my ex-wife's mother, and they were congratulating her. They have a different relationship with her than I do, which is to say that I haven't spoken to her in 22 years, 23 years. And I, amidst lots of feelings, felt like I needed to address her directly and say congratulations. So I did. And she said hello and nothing else. And in the moment, I interpreted it to be laden with a whole lot of, and you don't need to be talking to me. It definitely felt like I was being put on notice that we were not okay. And that does to a degree comport with my memory of how she used to communicate and interact. Not with me, but I knew that was a capacity that she had, so I had that, and I had feelings about it. It sucked. I was like, I was trying to be deliberate in the context of my desires for the outcomes for my daughter. And, this wasn't a fight, this wasn't a a problem in that sense. But it felt like there was a negative value to the exchange, and I felt bruised by it. In some ways, it felt like a fulfillment of my personal prophecy that this was a risky circumstance, which isn't to say that I wouldn't have done it anyway, but it is my anticipation that it was going to be challenging. So that's a thing. But this comes into the context of Heidi Priebe and her work, because later at the reception, I was talking to my daughter and I told her about this exchange. At the time, the story in my head was that I was just grateful that she was taking time out of this celebration where she was surrounded by friends and family, all of whom she could have chosen to talk to, and she was taking time to talk with me. And I was having a little bit of a blank moment where I was like, fuck, what do I talk about? And of course, this is what I chose to talk about. At the time, my daughter is aware, how could she not be, that, there's some spiciness, some challenge around these family dynamics, these family relationships. And she responded with, oh gosh, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. Referencing having the idea to say something, and I made some noises about how I didn't feel like I couldn't, or I didn't feel like I had a choice because there was the line of family, and it would have been more awkward if I'd said nothing, and yada yada yada. So, a pretty minor exchange. And then the next morning at the brunch, my daughter let me know that she had actually asked her grandmother about it, and her grandmother said that she didn't recognize me, and that was why she responded in the way that she did. Which, just on a transactional level, I feel like that is one of those things that is plausible, but could also be explained in different ways, which is to say, maybe she didn't want to feel or make her granddaughter feel negative about the circumstance, so she told a little fib about the interaction. That doesn't matter at all, right? That doesn't matter at all. What matters is In retrospect, this exchange between me and my daughter was one where, arguably, I was feeling dysregulated, and I was asking my daughter to make me feel better. Which, that's not optimal. Like, she's in the middle of having her wedding, thinking about all sorts of things that are happy and whatnot, and innocuous or not, if what I did was in fact, me hoping to have her make me feel better, to have her help me feel better, then it's super unfair, in general, and in the context of what Heidi Priebe's talking about, it's it's deceptive. I mean, in the moment, I wasn't thinking to myself, oh, I am totally asking her to regulate me. But like in retrospect, it feels kind of obvious that that's what was going on. Right? Now, this is the kind of thing where, years ago I would have had no difficulty using this opportunity to feel bad for weeks. Thankfully, we are not living in those eras anymore. So I feel like it's the thing that I wish had gone better at the wedding, related to my own performance and participation. But I'm also not in a place anymore where that's going to really dysregulate me for a long time. It'll probably stick in my craw. It'll come up at moments, awkward moments, and I'll be like, shit. But yeah, all things considered, I'll probably be just fine. And I think that there's not relational repair that needs to occur between me and my daughter, although one wonders whether telling her about this thought process constitutes sharing things that I'm learning or asking for additional regulation. It can be tricky to suss that out. But regardless, all in all, I think we're okay. But yeah, I think the what would I do better with the new understanding thing is basically just, keep it to yourself. That seems most obvious. Right? Keep it to yourself. But who can say? Who can say? Anyway, I wanted to share that. I wanted to inquire whether any of you recognize that experience. The desire to be close to somebody and then discovering that the ways that you were doing it were inconsistent with the best version of yourself that you want to be in a relationship. I also want to invite you to check out Heidi Priebe's videos because they are great. Yeah, really, really great. Yeah.